Hello, America. Today's show topic includes bumper boats. And when I say bumper boats, I'm talking big boats, big style bumper boats, bigly. And Hollywood, I think, is pushing the agenda of the left. So sit back, buckle up, and hang on because, yes, we're just getting started. Well, okay, we've got some technical difficulties going on with the audio, so bear with me. I don't know what the hell is going on. Anyway, hey, how you doing? I'm Daniel.
I'm Roxanne.
And you're watching or listening to the Stafford Voice. That's right, where we are conservative in a world of liberal. I want to remind you there are many ways to tune in, so that's right, set this channel as a favorite, whatever you have to do so you don't get left behind. Because if for some strange, crazy reason you do miss the show, you can catch a replay. So just sit tight. There's no need to panic because, hey, we got you. In just to make sure, just subscribe wherever you're at. Subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. That's all you got to do. It's the easiest way to stay caught up with anything and everything. Also, in the case you aren't already following on social media, you can find us over on Twitter or Gab at Stafford Voice, or on Facebook, Instagram, whatever your social site of choosing is, wherever you're at, just search for the Stafford Voice and hell, we're probably there. Okay. Now, without further ado, this guy doesn't need an introduction at all. Many of you know and love him. Over on the Twitters, you guys know him as Army John. We've snagged him while he's out over on the East Coast. Normally he's on the West Coast, but he's on the East Coast. He's out vacationing, and we decided we were going to ruin it. And we were going to bring him on, and we're going to talk about bumper boats. Army John, are you with me?
Hey, Daniel. Good evening. Good evening, Roxanne.
Good evening.
Alrighty. Hey, love having my vacation ruined by my battle buddies. I just want to let you know. Love it.
Well, look, I'm glad that we were able to do this. I know this is something that you've been kind of hinting to me for a while now on social media, that you wanted to talk about playing bumper boats. So I figured that the best time to do that would be while you're out on vacation. So hop in a boat, let's play bumper boats, and let's talk about this. More importantly, I guess the topic is what? That the Navy keeps having accidents.
Yes, and not the kind where you just have to change your shorts either. So I want to review a couple of things tonight. Yeah, exactly. Keep it fresh. No, the ongoing issues that we've seen. In fact, this is my fourth time on your show, so this is quite an honor and a privilege. I love contributing here to Conservative in a World of Crazy. So, as you recall, our first time you had me on, we talked about a certain pair of naval vessels that were mysteriously captured by virtually unarmed Iranian boats in the Gulf. And then we had another collision with the frigate, and now we ended up with a collision with the USS John McCain. So this is kind of a recap of a bunch of things that have been going on, and just like get a chance to kind of recap a pattern here. And I think this is more than just simply a collision. Sadly, sailors lost their lives on this last collision, but this seems to be a pattern of a bigger symptoms of a bigger pattern. What do you think?
I do, and I've found two different articles that I think kind of it really kind of painted a picture, and one of them was what do I gotta call it? It's basically a transcript of two guys talking. The guy was being interviewed, and what was the guy's name? Wow, I guess he went by the name Captain F. He was a a Navy captain who spent 20 years at sea and 10 in the Pentagon, and he was being interviewed by Wes O'Donnell. He is the managing editor of InMilitary.com. I think you sent me this.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So here's the thing. He touched on quite a few things, and he brought this up. This is the gist of their conversation was exactly what we're talking about. How is it that the most elite fighting forces in the world can have a collision in the middle of the ocean? How? So he said, and he brings up that two separate collisions of the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John McCain, as you'd mentioned, but he touched on a couple of things that I didn't even think of. More importantly, he brings up this idea of a peace dividend. And he says, more precisely, a peace dividend is to move funding from the military to social projects. And then he goes on to talk about how he's been through two significant drawdowns while he was in service from 1974 to 2003. And I think that kind of is a good place to start, which is we've had some significant drawdowns in the military, whatever force it's been, whether it's the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force. I mean, I think you see things differently than many of us do. So I'd like to hear you comment on the idea that, and he starts with Vietnam. He says the first came after Vietnam when the Navy drew down from a high of about 900 ships, about 700 at the end of the war, down to under 500. And then he says that something that we've talked about till we've been blue in the face here on the show, and that is that the military has become something of a social experiment. But I want to touch on the idea that this drawdown of ships, I'd really like to start there and work our way through.
Absolutely, Daniel. And for your listeners out there, services like the Navy, Coast Guard to the most, not as much, Air Force, they tend to be capital-heavy services. In other words, you have very expensive vessels. That's part of their service. As you and I both served in the Army, we tend not to be a capital-heavy service. We tend to be more a personnel-heavy service, where you have, entire battalions of tanks. You have a lot of personnel. But the Navy, you're talking billion-dollar aircraft carriers, multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers, talking multi-million-dollar frigates, destroyers, guided missile cruisers. So they're very expensive assets, single individual assets in the service. So when you begin to start drawing down on ships, and the ship count is just a bellwether. It's telling you what's happening inside the service. Usually the first thing to go in those capital-heavy services is skills and training. Even when I was in the Coast Guard, I'd say coming up on 5 years ago now, there was a desire to consolidate roles into single positions. I'll give you an example. I was a signalman, and that has to do with semaphores and flags. Then I went to ship-to-ship, ship-to-shore communication, so I was considered a TC. Then all of that kind of got folded into quartermaster. So now you've got a position performing really three jobs. And by the time I got out, it was a bosun's mate, was usually the rating on the enlisted side that did all of those tasks, everything from semaphore, radio communications, quartermaster, then running the ship as it is. So you've got a smaller number of roles doing a lot more work, which require a lot more training. So as these ships get drawn down, you're also, by the time the ships are being drawn down, you've actually gone through a lot of other things, training being one of them. One of the things I got to see recently was a GAO report that kind of backed up what was the article that I had sent you earlier, and then the amount of training has plummeted in the Navy, especially for sailors that are deployed overseas, say Japan or places in the Mediterranean. they're not making their rates because of training. And the second thing is their qualifications are expiring. That's another thing that's happening. So unlike the Army, you went through your combat engineering school, you're a combat engineer until you either decide to go officer school or whatever you want to do. You maintain your training throughout your career in the Army. The maritime services like the Coast Guard, and I think for the most part the Navy, you have to maintain proficiency a certain number of hours a year, and then you also have to be retrained. Otherwise, you go back to a trainee status, and that's kind of the difference between the Army and the Navy. So these qualifications expire. I mean, once you go to signal school at Fort Gordon, you're in a signal platoon, whatever. You set up equipment. You can be in 25 years, and that's what you do. Now it's just a matter of you want to get promoted. You want to go to the next level, you take the next level of training, whether it's NCO school, whatever. But the bottom line is, by the time you start seeing drawdowns in ships, like we did in the 1970s, we're kind of seeing that again, even though we're still in the middle of the war on terror. We're kind of seeing a drawdown before the war actually ends. And that's kind of a scary situation. So we're still technically at war, but then we're losing assets. I think a lot of this has been the prioritization of our spending. If you look at the Carter administration and versus the Obama administration, a lot of parallels. Social investment, capital investment, experimentation in the military, and then draw down on assets, big assets like cruisers and frigates, large bombers for the Air Force. So I think as the audience reads, yeah, we're drawing down ships and we're losing the numbers, there's a lot else that has been lost before that point, before we got to that point. And I think that's what's happening. You recall the article, the thing that I was looking for in this article, and I kind of got a little bit confirmed. It was CNN had a really nice article, one of the few nice articles I read from them, but that sort of GAO report on the Fitzgerald collision, and then the overall pattern of training reduction in the Navy. If you look at Occam's razor, you're familiar with that. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. And one of the things I think that I was afraid of, that this was going to be a personnel mishap, as opposed to some of the theories that were out there with the Fitzgerald and then again with the USS McCain, was either interference with radar, the automatic positioning system, the AIS, digital ship-to-ship communication, jamming of some kind, or possibly hacking into Navy frames. So some technical malfunction is kind of what I was looking at. My experience being on a ship, there's redundancy to the redundancy. Collision alarms from your radar, collision alarms from your GPS. I mean, unless you're asleep on the bridge, you're going to hear an alarm of some kind. And my worst... Go ahead.
Way later in the article, he basically lists out 6 or 7 different things. This is according to Captain F. And this was him talking. So I'm kind of going along with what you're saying, that in the military everything is redundant. We all know this. Anybody that's ever served, anybody that's ever been on a military post and seen the inside of a Jeep or a Humvee or anything, even in movies, they get this right. That there is a stupid, ridiculous level of redundancy. They have redundant measures for the redundancy. It's ridiculous. Almost to the point to where we put so much work into looking at 2 different things when we could just be putting our assets and personnel into monitoring one thing instead of monitoring 3 things. Well, and what you had talked about earlier, we've got radar, we've got these ship-to-ship communications. Well, here's the thing. So they asked him a question. They said, so it's a leadership issue. Captain F says this: what gave out was leadership. The admirals did not put their careers on the line and object about anything. They rolled over to save themselves. That's the big picture. And then he goes on to say, I'm willing to bet that those ships involved in incidents with merchants had all their sexual orientation, transgender training, and environmental training all completed at the expense of the safety and operational training. If you put the emphasis on social issues, you get a social force. If you put it on operational issues, you can get an operational force. He's read the actual reports of the Fitzgerald, were were so simple and basic it takes your breath away. Technology can never replace humans in totality, especially when the law of gross tonnage applies. Basically, we don't really need to go into it. It's ridiculous. But to highlight the leadership failures, he says first, there was a failure by the nation and particularly the executive branch of the government to recognize that by using the armed forces as a social change agent as well as denying them the tools, aka forces, to do the job will always cause the forces to break. We're at a breaking point and it shows. Second, there was a failure in naval leadership writ large from the time we tried to transform the forces to meet the threat to today. Not enough senior leadership was stepping forward, ready to sacrifice themselves so our sailors would not be. Third, the direct chain of command must have been weak. He's pointing to the 7th Fleet. He said either the standards are too low or they are worrying about other things. I suspect they are worrying about other things such as the social experimentation going on and how they get through so they can continue to survive themselves. Fourth, the ship climate and command structures were obviously out of whack. And that goes to say that, these commanding officers on the ship have so many things that they're trying to keep their eyes on. And out in the middle of these shipping lanes, the water is choppy, and the last thing you can do is try and sleep in these conditions. So number 5, he says, while it may be convenient or popular to string some kind of conspiracy theory, the mistakes were all simple things: basic ship handling, navigation, and seamanship stuff. Destroyers do not get run down by merchants. They're faster and much more maneuverable. No, they were not hacked. They were not run down on purpose. They were just asleep at the wheel. 6, I'm surprised and will continue to be surprised if some of these folks in leadership positions are not court-martialed. Well, that's heavy language. And then lastly, he says we need to truly transform the services, not from a social viewpoint, but rather a warfighting viewpoint. Again, I'm backing you up. That high-level leadership was asleep at the wheel. I don't care who you are. Nobody was manning these ships. It's the same problem that we saw over off the coast of Iran. Was it not?
Oh, absolutely. You have crews pulling double and triple shifts. I've had it where I've done 18-hour days for my limit's about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks, and I've done deployments where I was up 18 hours a day. And I'll tell you what, by the time you're done with that mission cycle, your body just crashes. Now that's on ground level. Ground experience in the Army, but could you imagine being at sea where you're gone for 6 months? Try doing 18 hours a day for 30 days.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty Iron Man if you ask me. So when you look at the reduction in ships, the reduction in personnel, and reduction in training, you've got ships going out there with sometimes less than minimum crew. Waivers, I remember going back with a number of trainees to trained crew. You actually had to have a write-off, or we call it a mission waiver, from the order issuing authority, which in our case was whatever our Coast Guard sector was. And they said, yeah, we see you've got 6 trainees aboard on a 28-person ship, so a third of our crew's never been to sea before. You get a waiver for that because we're doing a pretty lightweight mission. These sailors are going out there with reduced crews doing extra work. And I think that was what stood out to me in that article. In addition to, we're losing ships, but we're also not retaining our people. Good, experienced sailors are getting out of the Navy. And in fact, I'm out of all branches, to that matter of fact. And you have, again, the social experimentation has consequences. I've got guys, in fact, I lost a really good first sergeant about 2 years ago because of, the uptick in the SHARP training. And for those of you, it's the sexual harassment assault prevention program that the Army has. It just got so ridiculous. You said the wrong thing to the wrong gender, and it's, you get written up, and then that goes on your your 201 file, and then here comes promotion time. Well, you made some soldier feel uncomfortable, therefore you're not promotable anymore. A lot of guys are getting out for those silly little reasons. And I look back to, was that the movie Valkyrie? And I promise I'll bring this tugboat to shore here. The movie Valkyrie was about the assassination of Hitler. But if you interesting fact in that point in the Third Reich and that regime is that the generals were terrified to tell Hitler what the real status was of their efforts on the front. He was notorious for executing generals that failed to perform. Now, granted, we're nowhere near that level, but if you look at the number of terminations of flag officers in all branches, was pretty high under the Obama administration. I mean, I read like every other month they were terminating some admiral or a 3-star general. So it was pretty amazing that the attrition rate at the higher commands. And so you know what? The administration or whatever civilian authority was definitely not military friendly. And so when you get those environments based on fear, what's going to happen? You're going to roll over. You're going to pass the buck on down the hill. The trouble for a lot of these sailors and troops in the field is how do you tie back a poor leadership decision to, you know, lives lost at sea or lives lost on the battlefield? That's really hard to do. And you got to have a pretty darn clear-cut case that Admiral so-and-so or General so-and-so didn't stand up to this focus on sharp or focus on transgendered acceptance in an airborne battalion, you know, as opposed to, you know, let's practice some basic skills out in the field. How does that decision result in the deaths of soldiers in the battlefield, or in this case, soldiers on the Fitzgerald and on the McCain? What did you think about that, Daniel, on the focus of leadership and the reduction of personnel on these ships?
I completely agree. I mean, here we have high-level leadership who is lacking one basic thing, and that is the safety and well-being of everyone else below them. Instead of raising the alarm and saying, hey, we have a problem, we can't man this the way we're supposed to safely, we have a problem. The fact that these guys, and even those in lower leadership, the guys actually on the, for lack of a better term, on the ground, shame on them. This falls on them as well. Because if they didn't raise enough stink about the entire thing and say, look, we can't do this. Well,
absolutely. And I've felt in the 9 years that I've been in the service between the Coast Guard and now the Army National Guard, I felt there was a period of time where our values as warriors was compromised. And then the government allowed a lot of things to happen that should never happen. And it had two consequences. The first consequence, those who were hardcore Army values just retired. It wasn't worth the fight. You're not going to win against the officers that are changing the system. You're just going to, unpromote yourself out of the service where, you have enough time and grade, you have to get out of the service or promote. So you have to retire. And a lot of guys said, I'm not going to, it's going to hurt not only me, but the troops below me. So I'm not going to fight this battle with the politics. The second thing that it did, and I think this is the more dangerous part of it, is we let in people and people with attitudes that are against the warrior values. I'm talking soldiers like Bergdahl or Chelsea Manning. And now we have a group of people who would normally be weeded out at MEPS or at BASIC or some AIT or some of these skills. You know what? I can't hack it. I'm not going to get away with this. I'm not fooling anybody. But now we had this window of time that we opened up these, the hardcore values that kept soldiers alive, kept the mission completed, kept the service honorable. There was this window of time that it became vulnerable and exposed. And I think we let in a lot of folks that really didn't share the values. Maybe, you can always chant a slogan, but when it comes down time to put your career on the line and do soldier care, these people would walk away from those because they just weren't as dedicated. It took me 9 months to get a soldier paid for a mission. He had residence issues, and I had work. He worked 22 days on active duty, and I was his NCO for that mission. Once he went back to his home unit, I was no longer responsible for him. But I'll tell you what, I sweated out 9 months. I talked to several different high-ranking officers in Sacramento to get this kid paid. I mean, he did the time. They just want to say, hey, the kid didn't get his check, let him go. I said, no, that's not right. And that's the difference between those who are willing to see the right thing done all the way through to the end and cost themselves possible promotability, as opposed to those who are willing to bowl over play the game, kiss the hand of Caesar, and spend the lives of the troops. And that's, if you look at, again, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here. If you look at other great nations of the world, what was the start of their decline? When they cracked on their values, whether it was Rome, whether it was the Third Reich, whether it's any other great power, when they compromised their values, that was the beginning of the end. I don't think it's too late for us. I think we've got an excellent opportunity to turn this around. But when we have the problems, not only financially with the downsizing and the drawdown, but we also have the social experimentation, those two have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed immediately.
It's so true. But this goes along with exactly what you were saying, and it touches on something that Captain F that he brings up. I'm trying to find it. Where he was talking about how they became something of a social experiment. How they had to focus. They basically had to put all of their assets into training for making sure that sexually transgendered soldiers, for instance, that everybody else on the ship was trained on how to properly work around them. You know, you've got this ultra-liberal leftist mentality that's moving into our military and completely wiping away our ability to be an elite fighting force. I mean, that's what they're there for. We don't have time for all this equal opportunity BS. How many times, and even, you know, it's been 17, 18 years since I had to sit in a stupid EO thing, and we have at least one a quarter. That's a full day where we could be out doing training. We could be nailing down how we're going to communicate with a tank squadron, and how they're going to be able to better send us information on what they're seeing, because, you know, we're, as a combat engineer, we were right there on the front line with them. And to be able to communicate is something that would have been better to put our assets and time into than sitting in an EO thing talking about gays in the military.
Absolutely. You know, I just was reminded something as you were talking. This last drill, we had that drill a couple weekends ago, and I had a corporal I had to pull off the watch. Now, we had some electronic surveillance. This guy was on his phone more than he was watching his station, and I said, you know what, Corporal, let's call it a night. Why don't you go home? I'm going to get somebody else to take your shift. He goes, what's the matter, Sergeant? I'm not doing a good enough job. He says, no, I said, you're on your phone. You're not supposed to have your phone on duty. So take a hike. And I did that not only for his benefit, but I also did it for the protection of the unit. Now, granted, it was a training exercise. You're downrange. It's not that, I mean, you know, Chinese aren't streaming over the Mexican border. But the point being, the soldier was demonstrating lack of attentiveness to his duty. So I pulled him off, kind of gave him a little warning and told the watch supervisor what happened. But the issue is, I felt like the last 8 years, we've, the previous administration, we've doing perimeter watch by staring into our navel. And then that's, we've let so much slackness and compromise into how we operate. I'm now really not surprised to see what we're seeing. I don't like seeing what we're seeing with the collisions, but you know, it's you've got so much activity going on with so few trained troops, expiring training certificates in the Navy. You've got crews that haven't been trained in years, and they're just out there. They're we used to call what do you call a tank without spare parts, ammunition, or fuel? What do you call that, Daniel?
Junk.
It's called a great big. Well, it's close. It's a great metal box containing future casualties. That's what we call it. Yeah. You know, and what are we doing when we're sending ships out there with undertrained crews, undermanned ships? You're an accident looking for a place to happen.
Let me just say this. This is the other article. I found this one on Stars and Stripes. They were talking about these quotes come from Defense Secretary Mattis. I mean, when it was announced that he was going to be that guy, everybody in the military jumped for joy. Finally, there was going to be somebody on our side. But when you get into this level of things, you become the same trash that everybody else hated. Here's what he says. Let me find. He says, quote, "I'm not willing to say right now that there's a direct line between sequestration and what has happened, but we're going to take a very close look at that." And then he goes on to say, let's see, in the article it says, since mid-July, nearly 100 U.S. service members have been killed or injured in close to a dozen mishaps. Among them, ship collisions, military aircraft crashes, and a marine amphibious vehicle that ran over and ruptured a gas line. 17 sailors were killed and 5 injured in 2 separate Navy ship collisions in recent months. He was referring to those two, the Fitzgerald and the John McCain. Then he goes on to talk about how the Navy has fired 6 senior officers, including the commander of America's Japan-based 7th Fleet, citing a loss of confidence in their ability to command. Well, I think that kind of falls on you, buddy. Then they said, top-level firings suggest that broader institutional, cultural, and training problems need to be addressed. Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea here. And then he says, 2 more things here. Senior leaders, he said, have to examine not just the specifics of an accident, but what is the environment? What is the culture? What have we done with training over this time? Have we reduced hours? Have we increased hours? Have some of these been the result of maintenance failure? You've got to look very, very broadly and look for data points, and we're doing that. And then he goes to say, they had asked him if military commanders are afraid to admit that if their troops are unprepared. He said no. Unbelievable.
Exactly. I think the single biggest thing that can be done to solve this, Daniel, is a revamp of the trust culture, not only in the command level, but down to the sailors of the ships or in the units deployed overseas. We do not have a system of trust. When we are so far down on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's just pure survival. And that's not a good place to be for any nation's defense. And I'm really hoping with the advent of Mad Dog Mattis taking over as Secretary of Defense is to rip out the CYA culture that is currently basically overwhelmed all branches of the military at this point. And hopefully, give it more time, we will see a reduction in accidents, reduction.
John, you still there?
Business taps and start seeing an increase in the it's going to take time. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. We cut you cut in and out there for a little bit.
Okay, sorry about that.
We'll blame it on the leftist leading organization. Yeah, we'll blame it on those who are listening in.
Absolutely. Sorry to disturb. So no, the bottom line is that to fix this, Daniel, we're gonna continue to see these incidents happen, whether it's ships being captured by the Iranians or we have additional collisions, until that culture of mistrust can be torn out. It's going to take time to get rid of, but I think with the people that Trump has placed in command of our military, I think things are looking up. It's just going to take a while to get through it, especially with the recent disasters with hurricanes that we've had. We may, that may take a little bit more time to revamp and get assets into the folks that need them, and then the leadership that they deserve as they put their lives on the line.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about making America great again. We can talk about draining the swamp. The fact of the matter is, this is a leadership issue. This falls directly on whoever is at the top, and then it works its way down. If he's not getting the proper intel as it works its way from the top to the bottom, it works from the bottom to the top. If these guys don't have confidence in their leadership, they will never go to them and admit that, hey, we have a problem.
Absolutely.
And until they get the right data from the boots on the ground, they can't properly submit the request to say, stop, we've got to train our guys better. We will never be able to defend ourselves if we continue down this path.
Absolutely. There was one principle of leadership I was taught very early on at NCO school, and that is who you are is who you attract. The type of leader you are is the type of follower you're going to attract. So where we've been for the last 8 years, what kind of leadership do we have there? Well, that's what was attracted. That will take time for itself to naturally attrition out of the services. They will eventually go away. But I think for the short term, we're probably going to see a few more of these incidents until those that were attracted to the previous administration and their leadership style, they will eventually retire or be asked to retire, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, again, I don't know if we've really talked about this in the past, but I think the fact that we've basically purged Washington of our military presence in, having elected officials as veterans. We've got to elect veterans as elected officials because they know when people say they have problems, those elected officials should be able to bear the burden and say, Mr. President, we've got a problem. It needs to come from the elected officials who are directly hearing it from us, the citizens, and it also has to come from higher up military leadership, and saying, the boots on the ground are saying this, Mr. President, we need more assets. We've got to do a better job of this. And and I just want to touch real quickly on what they're saying over in the chat room, where they're saying that it's a little early to place the blame on Mattis, and I'm not blaming Mattis at all for this. I'm blaming his language. I don't think his language was quite expected of someone who had been in the military. I think it would have been nice for him to come out and say, yeah, we've got some problems, we're addressing it. This is just another highlight this is like a highlight reel, if you want to say, of one of our problems. We've already addressed it. We're in the middle of fixing it. It's not going to happen again. I can guarantee that. I don't think that him coming out and just giving a one-word answer like that was quite the level of Mattis, if you ask me.
Absolutely. And I think he's going to need time. It's like the economy. You elect a president and you expect the economy to turn around right away. No, it takes 3 to 4 years for those things to cycle through, to tear out the problems, find out where they exist, and then remove them.
Right. Yeah, I think that, over the years, the immense budget cuts that we've put on our military, basically the carrot in front of them, the sequestration approach to the military funding, I think has played an impact. But again, the idea of this social experimentation played on our military has to have had drastic consequences, and I think that we're finally seeing those things come to play, and it puts a level of "I told you so" in the hands of Mattis when he said, "Look, we've got to stop. We can't allow this stuff, Mr. President." He told Trump that. He said, "These social experiments, like what we're doing right now with gays in the military and LGBT stuff, all that. I don't want to come across as negative to that, but we really have to look at the effects of our military readiness with all of that stuff." And that's where Mattis, I think, was coming from. But we can sit here and talk about it until we're blue in the face, but we're not the ones in charge. I think,
no, but we yeah, I'd say we're not the ones in charge, but there are those who are stepping forward, like Tom Cotton, folks who put their time in uniform and now are serving in the Congress. They see where the big threat is happening. But I'll tell you what, if we're not writing our congressmen and congresswomen and saying we need a budget, we need a federal budget, because what the continuing resolution allowed Congress to do was to make cuts without making cuts. They just simply reduced funding. And that's in 90-day or 6-month increments. But I think once we have a solid federal budget, a lot of those priorities will come out. And we're not calling our congressmen saying, where's our federal budget? Where's our spending? What are we spending our money on? I think we're going to continue down the slope until that changes.
Yeah. And so I just want to highlight, I want to say one final thing about this entire topic. And we're in our efforts to shift the show back and talk about how this affects you, the listener, or you, the viewer. This is a big topic. It is a very, very big, broad topic. But how this affects you is, if our military is not 100% ready, if our military readiness is not where it should be, we cannot properly defend ourselves. And when we have crazed lunatics like, what did Trump call him? Rocket Man? When we've got Rocket Man over there launching intercontinental ballistic missiles over the houses of Japanese, we're not going to be able to be military ready to be able to respond. We're not going to be able to. Our ground troops in South Korea aren't going to be able to do it. And case in point, what we're talking about now with these two playing bumper boats here, if our ships aren't ready and operating at the capacity that they are expected to operate at, we cannot defend the rest of the free world. And John, I'm going to give you the last word, and so go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, the primary consequence, as you just mentioned, is our perception of the rest of the world, not only to our allies, but also to those who'd like to see us fall apart. Whether it's China's building up their Pacific Fleet, they've are claiming international waters now as their territorial waters. They can get away with this because we have sent them signals. We have sent them messages. We're not willing, we're not capable, and we're not ready to defend our allies, our interests, and our economy. So you're going to continue to see these Iran, Hezbollah, and other groups as we have projected weakness for so long, and these accidents and mishaps are definitely proof of the message we've been sending. So until we fix these issues that we mentioned, we're going to continue to project weakness, and that's the one thing we can't afford to project. It's not weakness of any individual warrior; it's just the collective perception that we've had over the last 8 years, in addition to things that are happening today. So until we get a budget, till we get priorities straightened out and take out social experimentations from our military, which will take time to weed these people and systems out, we're going to be fighting battles we should be preventing, if that makes any sense.
100%. I'm right there with you. So I want to echo something that you had said earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not writing your congressmen, calling your senators, if you're not calling your elected officials and writing them, you're part of the problem. You need to get out there and you need to raise awareness. That's how this affects you. Don't do your part. That's all I want to say. John, let me end by saying how humbled I am that you took time out of your vacation to come onto the show and talk about this. I'm super, super grateful that you did. You took the time out, and as always, brother, I appreciate it. Anytime you've got topics like this that you want to talk about, we're ready.
Got your six, brother. You have a great night.
You
Goodbye,
too, buddy.
Roxanne.
Bye. Have a
Make
good
some
night.
good cookies for Daniel.
Oh, we already had them. I'm getting ready to talk about them, and so hang in there. So you'll hear all about them here in just a second.
All right. Good night, Daniel.
Have a good one, John.
Good night.
Okay, guys, look, and I understand I understand 100% how big of an issue this is. But I just want to highlight the fact that if our military isn't fully ready, that's how it impacts you. If we continue to bring up these budget issues, it slows down our operational readiness. We have got to put the pressure on Washington to put out a budget. It's just I can't stress this enough. We have got to be able to support and defend what our brothers and sisters in the military need. They need things that aren't. Washington's not doing their part. Many of us do. So anyway, speaking of doing our part, cookies. That's right. John brought up the idea of cookies. Lately, I've been doing the snack before the show, and I want to give a shout out to Roxanne because the other night she made some chocolate chip cookies, and I'll admit I was a little beside myself.
I think you were hesitant.
I was extremely hesitant. Why? Why was I hesitant?
Because they were coconut flour chocolate chip cookies. So instead of using like regular flour, it was used coconut flour. So it was kind of a low carb.
Seriously,
keto
who does
diet.
this?
Pinterest.
Oh, I don't know who comes up with the idea of stuff like this, but look, you tried it. You made them. They looked good.
They should. I don't know, the whole cooking
healthy
process.
Cookies, Jess. I don't get it.
Well, I added extra chips in
There,
it. So
there was nothing. There was nothing healthy about these cookies. They were overstuffed with triple chip chips.
Like semi-dark or semi-chocolate, milk chocolate, and then like the white Premier chocolate chips. So. And I did 2 bags instead of 1.
Because, one bag's not enough.
Can't just eat 1.
Nope. You can't. Okay. Yes, Slick, that's right. Hippies come up with this kind of crap. But here's the thing. They don't call themselves hippies. They call themselves bohos. It's short for bohemians. Yes, bohemians are the new hippies. Anyway, I've talked enough. Do you have anything you want to talk about? Do you have anything you want to bring to the table?
Yes.
What?
You know Elizabeth Moss, right? She's the one who plays
from Handmaid's Tale
on Hulu.
Right.
Yeah. Well, she is doing a movie.
Wait, is this a movie or is this a series? Because I thought she did pretty good, and so did everybody else, because she won an Emmy for Handmaid's Tale.
2 Emmys.
2 Emmys, right.
I'm assuming it's more of like a trilogy type thing, but the first movie that's coming out is called Call Jane. Okay, so
she's going to be in a new movie.
Yes.
It's called Call Jane.
Yes.
Why do I need to call Jane?
Because it's a story that sets in Chicago during the 1960s, and it focuses on the true story of an underground network of suburban women who secretly provide safe abortions.
What?
For women in need.
What the hell is a secretly safe abortion?
I don't know, because I'm assuming it's going to be like in a dark alley or someone's home. You're not in the medical facility.
Okay, so wait a minute. You're telling me Hollywood is playing into the leftist ideology and pushing the idea that abortion is okay.
Yes. And this takes
place... Wait. Wait a minute. Because something just clicked into my head. Now, I know sometimes sometimes the speed limit is not so quick inside. isn't Moss a Scientologist?
I believe so. I think we saw that, yeah.
So, one of our favorite shows, which is that Leah Remini Scientology thing. And this really paints the idea that it really highlights something, that if Moss is a Scientologist, then
she's okay with abortion.
She's completely okay with abortion, because we learned on the Scientology thing, Leah Remini had a guest on there that
a former Scientologist.
What did they basically forced her?
It was the husband, and
that's right.
He was excited about the baby, but I guess they didn't, because they were in the Sea Org, which is really important work to do to clear the planet. They talked.
We need to clear the planet of leftists.
Right.
This is weird.
They're doing
this is
their job
sick.
wrong. But they told him he needed to go home and convince his wife that she needed to have an abortion, and so he did. And I don't know how long ago it happened. I can't remember. He said, but you could tell it still haunts him to this day that he did that he convinced his wife to have an abortion, and she didn't want one.
So they want her to play a role in this movie.
Yes, she plays a married woman who is unexpectedly pregnant and discovers the underground group of women. So she basically goes and has an abortion without her husband knowing it. How disturbing is that?
That's sick.
Very sick. And you know who else is helping with this movie besides Hollywood?
I can only imagine. Please tell me it's not Planned Parenthood.
Bingo. It's Planned Parenthood.
This is bull.
Yep. And they'll have 2 more movies after that they're planning that kind of go along, that are based on the same illegal abortion network.
Okay. So it's not enough to have one movie. Now they're going to come out with 3 of them.
Yes. Because it's a historic true story of what happened in Chicago during the 60s. They had an underground abortion network.
So we're glorifying underground abortions?
Yes.
And Hollywood is okay with this?
Yes.
This is where society is now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And this all happened before Roe versus Wade.
So this was like a precursor then?
Yes. Because it says this took place, it says that this underground abortion network helped over 11,000 women get illegal abortions in Chicago between 1969 and 1973, before Roe versus Wade allowed legal abortions.
Unbelievable. So flippin' stupid. Okay, so Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
Correct. Shut up. So, because of the technical difficulties, I'm not constrained with time right now. It wasn't working on that side, so who cares? You got bonus to you guys that are watching. Okay, so here's what I don't get. We watched The Handmaid's Tale. I enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting show. I watched it with an open mind. But knowing that leftists absolutely were all over this when the book came out, 30 years ago. When this story came out 30 years ago, leftists were all about it. Why? Because in The Handmaid's Tale, it's a dystopian, utopian society where the government says, oh, we're in charge. This is your job. This is your job. The government's in control of everything, just the way leftists want.
Well, it says here, they kind of give just a short few thing about what The Handmaid's Tale is. It says it's a story that takes place in the Republic of Gilead, the reimagined United States conquered by Christian fundamentalists.
They can't be Christian fundamentalists.
The show follows a woman named Offred and her fellow handmaids as they are forced to bear children from the upper class.
Yeah, because a lot of Christians are going around and having a rent-a-woman come in and have sex with their husband.
That's the only reason why they are forcing these women to have the babies is because there's a decline in childbirth. There's not very many children being born, and so they're trying to, I guess.
Maybe it's because the government was putting fluoride in the water and turning all the frogs gay.
Well, no, it's probably because they were all having abortions.
Right. When you kill off everyone.
So it's kind of interesting that she is now going to be playing in a movie that is
promoting the idea that
promoting abortions, but yet she's doing this series where it's kind of the opposite. So yeah.
She's an idiot.
Yeah, I know I'm not that educated, but when I was reading this story and they were asking her about it, it was kind of like an Obama type moment where she's trying to answer the question, but instead of doing the she's just kind of repeating some of the same words over again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt sorry for her, but then I realized
I don't feel sorry for her. This is the crap that they believe. They truly buy into this junk. Because these are the same people. Don't forget, she's the same type of person that sits there and thinks that she can cleanse her mind
by hanging on to some cans.
By holding on to some metal cans that are attached to a little thing with wires.
That you paid like $5,000 to do.
Oh, she paid way more than that.
Oh, because she's a celebrity, so she's going to pay more.
Right. Oh.
I don't get the Scientology thing, and
I don't get it either. Kudos to Leah Remini. That woman's brave.
She is. I read her book, and it was a really good book. And
You read her book?
Yeah.
Oh.
I read it's called Troublemaker.
Yeah.
And it talks about her life growing up and when she started Scientology with her mom and just how she was during Scientology and when she decided to leave and what happened and the stuff that started her leaving. So she just sounds like she's a fun person that she would like to
She does. She sounds fun. The thing that kind of weirds me out with her, though, is it looks like she paints on extra to her upper lip. It's really
I'm not
weird.
worried about that. I worry about her nails. They look pointed, and I'm thinking, man, she could poke your eyeball out.
That's the new. That's the new thing. That's the new thing. They want to. I saw where somebody took like hair. It was I think it was fake hair. I'm hoping it was fake, and they put it around the cuticle, and they kind of make it look like it's a nail, and then they paint faces on it, so it looks like a little head. Yeah, weird, crazy.
How do you do daily activities?
Like stick your finger in your ear? Well, it would kind of tickle.
I'm talking about like working or just cleaning kitchen, cooking dinner. I mean, instead of finding. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Anyway, so the gal that played the lead role in Handmaid's Tale is going to play the lead role in getting an underground abortion.
You are correct.
How do you come up with this stuff?
Internet.
You're going to believe everything on the internet?
It's on the internet. It must be true.
It must be true. Right. Mm-hmm. Anyway, is that all we got? Is that all you got? You got more?
No.
Okay. That's all I got. So, refill. Not going there, buddy. Not going there. By the way, I really hope you caught the Friday broadcast. I tried to give a shout out to your guy, but I didn't see him jump in.
You have to give him an A for effort and for being persistent.
Yeah. I am. I'm trying to let him know that on the Friday show, I tried to reach out to the guy and I don't remember seeing him pop up. So, anyway. So, yes, that's all the time we have for this week. And if we don't die this weekend because it's the end of the world, right? It's the end of the world because Planet X is supposed to come crashing in, and
that's what I thought I heard
on
briefly,
September 23rd. So, if we don't die, the Oliver dude, yeah, you remind him to be there Friday. I was going to give Oliver a shout out, but I didn't see him. Okay, so yes, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week. If we survive through the weekend and we don't die in the September 23rd Planet X crashing into Earth, we'll be back next week. You can follow us on Twitter or Gab at Stafford Voice. You can look us up on Facebook or Instagram. All you got to do is just search for the Stafford Voice. Also, no, Jess, I'm giving Refill a hard time. He's trying to get me to say something funny. He thinks it's funny. I'm not saying it. Anyway, email your questions, comments, or concerns to the Stafford Voice at gmail.com. Again, the Stafford Voice at gmail.com. So, yeah, hopefully Planet X is a hoax. I really hope so. I'm pretty sure it is. I want to say thank you so much for your time tonight, tuning in and watching. Until next time, because we'll be here. Thanks and God bless.